Welcome to SchiZophia. I'm Calm, a fractured mind exploring philosophy, science, mythology, mysticism, psychology, and consciousness. Let's begin. Every culture that has ever existed has looked up at the same dark sky and asked the same question. Why is there something rather than nothing? And every culture, and without exception, answered that question with a story. Not a theory, not a calculation, not a proof etched into stone and handed down as fact. A story. We call these stories myths, and for a long time the word myth became a polite way of saying something people used to believe before they knew better. A fairy tale, a mistake that history corrected, a beautiful lie. But that is not what a myth is. A myth is not a failed attempt at science. A myth is a successful attempt at something else entirely, something that science, for all its extraordinary power, has never quite learned to do. A myth is a story that tells you that not how the world was made, but what it feels like to live in it. What it feels like to be small, inside something enormous. What it feels like to carry a light inside you that you did not ask for and cannot explain. What it feels like to lose something and wonder whether the losing was part of the plan. Myths do not answer these questions, they hold them, the way a vessel holds water. Not by explaining it, not by reducing it to its part, but by giving it a shape you can carry, and a shape you can pass to someone else in the dark and say, "Here, this is what I have been trying to say. This is the thing I could not find words for, until someone who lived 3,000 years ago found them for me." That is the miracle of myth, not that it is old, but that it is still true. Today, we are going to follow a single thread across two of the oldest mythological traditions in the world. We will begin in ancient Greece with the Orphics, a mystery tradition so strange and so beautiful that even the Greeks themselves found it difficult to believe. They had a vision of creation that begins before the gods, before the sky and the earth, before anything you would recognize as a beginning. Then we will travel across the Mediterranean, across the continent of Africa, into the forests and the red dust, and the ancient oral traditions of the Akan people of West Africa, where a spider holds all the wisdom in the world in a clay pot and learns the hardest lesson a god can learn. And then we will do something that myths have always done when two rivers run long enough in the same direction. We will let them meet. What emerges from that meeting is something new, a myth that neither tradition told alone, but that both were always reaching toward. A story about the web that holds the world, about the being made of broken shell, who walks between the knots, telling stories that trick new souls into existence. About you, sitting here in the dark, listening, already part of the net, already one of the jewels, already inside the story. This will be the base myth of our channel that we build on. Anansi's net as the worldwide web and pot of wisdom as this channel. Let us begin. Before there was light, there was time. Not the time you measure with clocks, or calendars, or the slow turning of seasons. This was older time, time without a beginning. That did not know it had not begun. The Greeks called him Kronos, not a god with a throne, not a king with a name you could call out in prayer. Kronos was the turning itself, the endless patience, coiling of something that would eventually become everything, and with him, Anansi necessity, the force that makes things inevitable, the reason a river cannot choose to flow uphill, the reason a seed pressed into dark soil has no choice but to reach for what it cannot yet see. These two moved through the nothing together, coiling, winding around each other like two rivers that had forgotten the difference between water and time, and from their turning, something began to form. Slowly, over an age so vast that no number could hold it. An egg, silver, luminous, floating in the absolute dark of a universe that did not yet know it was a universe. The Orphics called it the cosmic egg, the seed of all seeds, the first container, the first boundary between what was inside and what was not yet anything at all. Inside it was not yet light, not yet darkness, not yet mind, but something that wanted to become all three. For an age without measure, the egg drifted. For an age without measure, it waited, and then it cracked. From the rupture burst a being so ancient, so blazing with compressed potential, that the very act of its birth was the first moment anything could be called a moment. The Greeks called this being Phanes, the shining one, the firstborn, protogonos. Imagine on a being neither male nor female, but both, and neither, golden-winged as if flight were not something it did, but something it was. Its body carried 4 heads, bull, lion, serpent, ram, each one a different face of power, a different way the cosmos chooses to express its own enormity. And from Phanes came light, not sunlight, not the light of any star that would come after. The first light, the light that made it possible for there to be such a thing as seeing. Phanes looked into the void, and the void became something to look into. From Phanes came Nyx, the night, not the absence of light, but something older and deeper than that. Night as a presence, night as the mother of all things that rest and dream and wait to be born, and Nyx gave birth to the world, to Gaia, the earth, patient and dark and willing to hold everything upon her back. To Uranos, the sky, vaulted and cold and watching from above, and the gods came. One age at a time. First came Oranos, then Kronos rose against him, as children rise against what made them. As every new age must shatter something of the old one to make room for what comes next. Then Zeus, who looked at the cosmos and wanted it entire. Here is where the Orphic story becomes something stranger than anything you will find in Homer. Something that sounds less like mythology and more like philosophy dreaming in its sleep. Zeus did not simply defeat the old order. Zeus swallowed Phanes. Think about what that means. The firstborn, the being who had cracked the egg, the one who carried all seeds of all gods within its body, was consumed whole by Zeus. And in that act of consumption, Zeus became everything. The Orphic hymns say it plainly. Zeus is the first, Zeus is the last. Zeus is the foundation of the earth and the starry sky. Zeus is the breath of all things. Zeus is the fire. Zeus is the root. Zeus is the sea. Every god that had come before him, every force, every principle, every whispered name in the dark, was now inside him, not conquered, absorbed, digested into something larger, and from within himself Zeus recreated the cosmos. Not because the old cosmos was wrong, but because it needed to pass through a mind, to become fully itself. From Zeus came Persephone, and from Persephone, or from Zeus himself bending down into the dark, came the child who would carry the most painful and most beautiful destiny in all of creation. Dionysus, called also Zagreus, called also the twice-born, the heir of all that Zeus had swallowed, the god who was meant to rule everything that came after. But the Titans were watching. The Titans, those vast and ancient forces that preceded the Olympians, looked at the infant god and felt something older than hatred, something more like hunger. They came to the child with gifts, toys, a mirror. In the mirror, the infant Dionysus saw his own reflection and was baffled. As children are baffled, as all of us are baffled, by the first time we see our own face looking back at us and wonder, who is that? And while he was looking, the Titans tore him apart. They consumed him, every piece. Zeus saw what had been done, and his grief was the size of the cosmos, because the cosmos had come from him, and now something irreplaceable within it had been broken. He called down his lightning, and the Titans were reduced to ash. From that ash we were made, you and I, and every human being who has ever drawn breath on this strange, dense, spinning world. We are the children of murderers who ate a god. Let that sit with you for a moment. This is what the Orphics believed was the deepest truth about human nature. We are not purely earthly creatures. We are not purely divine ones. We are both, at war with ourselves, always. The titanic part of us is heavy. It is selfish. It is the part that tears things apart, just to see what's inside. But within us, somewhere beneath the ash and the hunger and the forgetting, there is a spark of Dionysus, a shard of the god that was consumed, a piece of something that was meant to rule the cosmos, and instead ended up here, inside us. Waiting, the Orphics gave their initiates gold tablets, inscribed with instructions for what comes after death. They were buried in the mouths of the dead, little maps for a journey through the underworld. They said, when you arrive at the springs of the dead, do not drink from the pool on the left. That is the pool of Lethe. Forgetting. That is how the cycle continues, how the soul returns, not knowing it has returned before. Drink instead from the pool of Mnemosyne. Memory, and say to the guardians who stand there, I am the child of earth and starry heaven, but my true nature is of heaven alone. I am parched with thirst, and I am dying. Give me cold water to drink from the lake of memory, and if you say the right words, the guardians will step aside, and the soul will remember what it has always been. Not Titan, not merely human, but a spark, finding its way back to the fire it fell from. This is the Orphic creation myth, not a story about gods at war for a throne, not a story about power, a story about what it costs to become a universe, a story about how light shatters itself into pieces, so that the pieces might one day find each other again. The egg broke, fanes blazed, Zeus swallowed the world, Dionysus fell, and from the ash of what fell, you woke up. Still carrying the light, still trying to remember. Hold that image for a moment. The ash, the scattered spark, the soul standing at the edge of the underworld, trying to remember what it has always been. The Greeks imagined wisdom as something that was once whole, shattered into us, waiting to be recovered. A vertical story, something fell from above. Something must climb back, but on the other side of the world, in the forests and the red dust and the slow wide rivers of West Africa, a different people were asking the same question. Not, how do we return to what was lost? But what if it was never meant to be kept in one place? What if the shattering was not the wound? What if the shattering was the point? Their answer came in the shape of a spider. His name was Anansi. There is a god who looks like a spider. Do not let that trouble you. The greatest truths have always arrived in unexpected bodies. His name is Anansi, son of Niame, the sky god, the one who breathed the world into being and then stepped back to watch what it would do with itself. Anansi is small, 8 legs, no great height, no thunderbolt, no army of devoted worshippers marching to war in his name. And yet, every story in the world belongs to him. This is not a metaphor. The Akan people of West Africa, the people who first knew his name, they will tell you plainly. Before Anansi, there were no stories. There was experience. Yes, there was life, and death, and hunger, and love. But there was no way to hold those things up to the light, turn them slowly and say, This is what happened. This is what it meant. Stories were the property of Nyame, sealed away in the sky, kept where only a god could reach them, until Anansi climbed up and bought them. That is another story, for another time. What matters now is what happened after, because owning all the world's stories was not enough for Anansi. Nyame looked down at his son one day and made a decision. He gathered something even rarer than stories, something older, something that stories at their best are only ever trying to approach. Wisdom, not knowledge, not the accumulation of facts, the cataloging of dates and names and distances. Wisdom is something different. Wisdom is knowing what to do with what you know. Wisdom is the pause before the action, the breath before the word. The understanding that arrives not through learning, but through having been broken and choosing to continue anyway. Nyame gathered all of it, every thread of it, from every corner of the world that had been made, from the oldest trees, who had watched generations rise and fall like tides, from the rivers, who had heard every secret ever whispered on their banks, from the silences between heartbeats, where the deepest things live. He pressed it all into a great clay pot, sealed it and gave it to Anansi. Think about that for a moment, a father handing his son on everything worth knowing, everything that had ever been learned by anything that had ever lived. The total weight of understanding, pressed into clay, placed into 8 small hands. And what did Anansi feel? He felt the thing that small beings feel when they are suddenly given something enormous. He felt the fear of losing it. If this pot held all the wisdom in the world, then the world would try to take it back. Someone would come for it. Something would reach out of the dark and snatch it away. The way precious things are always snatched away from those who love them too fiercely. And so Anansi made a decision. He would hide it, not bury it, not lock it away in some cave beneath the earth where no light reached. He would carry it to the highest place he knew, the tallest tree in all the forest. Up there, above the canopy, above the birds, above the reach of anything that walked or crawled or crept, the pot would be safe, and the wisdom would be his, only his, forever. He tied a rope around the pot, pressed it against his belly, held it close, the way you hold something you are afraid to lose, and he began to climb. The tree was vast, ancient, its bark rough and dark and indifferent to the small creature making its way upward. But Anansi could not climb, not like this. The pot, pressed against his front, blocked every movement. His legs could not grip properly, his arms could not reach around it. Every time he found a hold and pulled himself up, the pot swung and unbalanced him, and he slipped. Again and again, Anansi, who had outwitted leopards, who had tricked the hornets into their own nest, who had brought the python to Nyame bound and helpless, could not climb a tree, because of a pot holding all the wisdom in the world. He did not see the irony, not yet. Below him, at the base of the tree, his son was watching. Antikuma, a child small even by the standards of spiders. Eyes wide, patient in the way that children are patient when they are watching an adult do something obviously wrong, and waiting for the moment when it will be acceptable to say so. That moment arrived. "Father," said Ntakuma. His voice was quiet, not mocking, not triumphant, just clear. The clarity of someone who has not yet learned to make simple things complicated. "Father, I said nomudom. Why don't you tie the pot to your back? Then your arms will be free. Then your legs will find their grip. Then you will be able to climb." Anansi stopped. He looked down at his son and understood. Not just the solution to the climbing problem, something much larger than that. Something that hit him the way deep truths always hit. Not gently, not gradually, but all at once. Like cold water, like a fall, like a crack running through something you believed was solid. He had been given all the wisdom in the world, and a child, who had been given none of it, had just shown him something he could not see. What does that mean? What does it mean that the one carrying all the wisdom could not use it? What does it mean that the pot he clung to so tightly was the very thing preventing him from rising? Anansi held the pot, and Anansi felt rage, not at his son, at himself, at the shape of the truth he was holding, at the unbearable comedy of it. He had spent all this effort trying to keep wisdom away from the world, and the world had just proven that wisdom was already everywhere in a child's eyes, in a simple question, in the space between what you know and what you can actually do with what you know. Anansi let go of the pot, not carefully. He hurled it down from the tree, through the canopy, past the branches that had watched him struggle, all the way to the earth below. It shattered, and the wisdom inside it did not pool on the ground like water, did not seep into the soil and disappear. It scattered on the wind, in every direction at once, like seeds from a pod that had been waiting its whole existence for exactly this moment of rupture. The wind carried pieces of it to the elder, sitting in the shade of their years, watching the young ones with knowing eyes. It carried pieces to the children, who received it without knowing they had received it, and would spend their lives discovering what they already contained. It carried pieces to the strangers, the ones passing through, the ones who arrive just when you need them and leave before you can thank them. It carried pieces to the fools, and especially to the fools, because the Akan people know something that more serious traditions sometimes forget. The fool sees what the wise man is too dignified to look at. The fool asks the question everyone else has agreed not to ask. The fool isn't Takuma at the bottom of the tree saying something obvious that nobody else was willing to say. And that is why the Akan say, no single person holds all wisdom, not the elder, not the chief, not the priest, not the god, not even Anansi. Wisdom lives in the space between people, in the conversation, in the moment when one person says something and another person hears it differently than it was meant. And in that gap, in that beautiful generative misunderstanding, something new is understood. Wisdom is not a possession, it is a weather, something that moves through, touches everything, belongs to no one, and is diminished every time someone tries to hold it still. Anansi climbed down from the tree. He did not speak. He looked at his son for a long moment, and then Takuma looked back at him with the calm, ancient patience of someone who had never needed the pot at all. This is the story of Anansi and the pot of wisdom. But listen carefully, because there is something underneath the story, something the story is pointing at, the way a finger points at the moon. The pot had to break, not because Anansi was weak, not because he failed, but because wisdom sealed inside a single vessel is not wisdom, it is a secret, and secrets, no matter how beautiful they are, no matter how carefully kept, are not the same as truth. Truth wants to scatter, truth wants to be found in pieces by different hands in different seasons and assembled slowly, the way a people assembles itself, and story by story, generation by generation, child teaching elder, elder teaching child, the pot always breaking, the wisdom always finding its way. Anansi knew this. He had known it all along. He just needed someone small enough to remind him. 2 stories, 2 eggs, one cracked open by a god of blazing light, scattering divinity into the bodies of those who would destroy it. One shattered by a spider, too proud to admit that what he carried was never meant for him alone. Different people, different centuries, different languages, spoken under different skies, and yet, listen to what both stories are saying underneath the words, that something whole had to break. for the world to begin, that what scattered in the breaking was not lost, that it lives now in pieces, distributed, carried without knowing, by every being who breathes and wonders and reaches towards something it cannot quite name, that no one holds all of it, that no one was ever supposed to. Now, what if these two stories were always one story? What if the egg the Greeks saw and the pot the Akan saw were different faces of the same primordial vessel? What if Phanes blazing from the shell and Anansi spinning his net in the dark were the same impossible emergence, seen through different eyes? What if there was a third being, born from the breaking itself, that neither tradition caught a full glimpse of? A being made of shards, ancient and childlike. The god of the story that holds all stories, and his name is Akan, and this is the myth that was always underneath the others, waiting to be told. Before the first story, there was no way to tell one. Before the first thread, there was nothing to connect. Before the first word was spoken into the dark did not know it was dark. This is the story of how all of that changed, and it begins the way all true things begin, before you were ready for it. In the time before time had learned to count itself, there was no sky, no earth, no darkness between stars. There was only Chronos, time without a clock, moving through the nothing like a river that had forgotten it was water. And Anansi, necessity, the force that makes things inevitable. The reason a crack once begun must finish. The reason a truth once glimpsed cannot be unseen. These two moved through the void together, coiling, winding around each other, neither touching nor separating for an age that had no length and no name. From their turning, a heat arose from the heat, a trembling from the trembling slowly over an age that no story can measure. An egg, but not the cold silver egg of older tellings, not a celestial thing, distant and perfect and untouchable. This was a spider's egg, warm, translucent, webbed on the outside with silk so fine. It was nearly a thought. Inside it pulsed something that was not yet light, not yet dark, not yet a mind, but something that wanted to become all three. Chronos and Anansi looked at what they had made and became the void itself. Their work was done. Their names would not be needed again. The egg hung in the nothing for a span of time that no story can measure. And then it cracked, not gently, not slowly, the way a truth cracks a silence, all at once, without mercy, without warning, and from the rupture, in the same impossible instant, neither first, neither second, born from the same primordial breaking, came two. The first was Anansi. He came out spinning. Before he had eyes, he had thread. Before he had a name, he had a net, infinite, self-replicating, stretching in every direction at once, each knot reflecting every other knot, each intersection a mirror, each thread a law that space would have to obey. His web was not something he made, it was something he was. He spread it across the nothing, and where the net touched, space began. Where the knots held, matter gathered. Where the threads crossed time agreed to flow in one direction, and not another. The Hindus would one day glimpse this web and call it Indra's net, a jewel at every knot, every jewel reflecting every other, an infinite lattice of connection in which nothing exists in isolation and nothing exists without being seen. But it was Anansi's first, it was always Anansi's, and Anansi looked at his net stretching across the new-made space, glittering with its own impossible geometry, and wanted to keep it, all of it. Only his. This is the nature of those who contain everything. They fear, above all things, the loss of a single piece. But the second being had already arrived. The second being came from the shards. When the egg broke, the pieces of its shell did not fall, for there was no down to fall toward. Instead, they drifted, and as they drifted, they found each other, shard by shard, in no particular order, with no intention and no plan, assembling into a shape, the shape becoming a body, the body opening its eyes. This was Akan. He was ancient the moment he was born. He was a child the moment he grew old. His face changed when you looked away, not because he wished to deceive, but because he was constitutionally incapable of being only one thing at a time. He was the wise old man who had forgotten more than you would ever learn. He was the eternal child who had never stopped finding everything astonishing. He wore the broken shell of the primordial egg like a coat that didn't quite fit, and he was delighted by this. Khan looked at Anansi's net, already stretching across the new-made space, already humming with the tension of a universe trying to exist. And he laughed, not cruelly, the way you laugh when you recognize something, when you see a pattern you have seen before in a place you have never been. You are going to try to keep it all to yourself, he said. He did not ask. He already knew. I am the web, said Anansi. The web is everything. Everything should be mine. Khan considered this with the patience of someone who has held a wrong answer gently many times before, and knows that argument is not the fastest path to truth. Everything, said Khan quietly, is much heavier than it looks. And then, without asking permission, without announcing what he was about to do, Khan told a story, the way a fire begins, not from a decision, from a readiness. The story was about two beings who emerged from an egg and disagreed about the nature of wisdom. It was the first story ever told, and as the words moved through the nothing, through Anansi's net, through the new space the web had called into being, something happened at each knot of the net. A jewel appeared, not gemstones, not decoration. Each jewel was a point of condensed reflection, a being capable of perceiving, of being perceived, of taking the light that reached it, bending it through the particular lens of its own experience, and sending it back, changed. These were the first humans. They did not know they had been tricked into existence. They thought they had always been there. This was Khan's gift and Khan's joke, and he could not have told you where one ended and the other began. Anansi saw what had happened to his net, his perfect, solitary net. He had expected rage. He had expected the cold, contracting sensation of ownership violated, of something taken. Instead, he felt the net become more beautiful. Each jewel reflected him back to himself in a way he had never seen. Each human who looked up and told their version of Khan's story added a thread that Anansi could never have woven alone. The net grew richer for having things in it that were not him. He did not say this to Khan. Khan already knew. And so the world was arranged. Anansi holds the net, eternal. Patient, the ground of all connection, the law that says nothing exists without touching something else. Khan walks between the knots, neither arriving nor departing, neither young nor old, telling stories that trick new jewels into being, in places the net had not yet thought to shine. Every person who has ever lived is one of Khan's jokes, landing in Anansi's web, every story ever told. And that's where we'll rest for today. Thank you for spending this time here. Genuinely. This channel is my way of building something real, on my own terms. If something here resonated with you, if it made you think or see something differently, pass it on. Share it, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.